Welcome to the future. Today we're going to make 3D web pages using Blender and JanusVR. So to start off, this is kind of the demonstration room here. Switch over to Blender. And the workflow that JanusVR now uses as of version 50 is physically based rendering. And if you're unfamiliar with that, no problem. I will be explaining all of it. So to start off, there are two types of workflows in PBR. There's the metallic workflow, metal workflow, and what's called the dielectric workflow. Now, dielectrics is everything except metal. So rock, plastic, literally everything except metal. And there's also a hybrid. Now, I will explain the hybrid version in a bit at the end of this. So let's get started. So this is Blender. Typical scene, you just have a couple objects. These are all the exact same objects, just UV mapped to whatever. So yeah, I can't explain everything there is to know about Blender. That would take years. So I will link in the description some of the best tutorials I use to learn how to use Blender, and I will also be including some PBR guides and some infographics on some of the common elements that you need to know of Blender to work in Janus. Now, there are some things with Blender. Basically, Blender doesn't have a PBR workflow. It's a bit complicated. So there are some things you need to know about Blender in order to export correctly to JanusVR. So to get started though on these workflows, generally speaking, you have 4 textures for any given material, and you can also use what's called a shadow map or an ambient layer or whatever. But that I'll cover the shadow maps and baking your own shadows and stuff like that in another video. This is just for your 4 basic material or textures that you'll be using for the PBR workflow. So you have diffuse. So this is metal. I guess we'll start with metal. You have diffuse. Now, in PBR, diffuse is always black because metals do not inherently have their own color. The second one is your specular layer. Now, specular color in PBR workflows is the color of the metal. So gold would be a gold color. Copper would be, redder color than this. You could do like a, chrome color or dark chrome color by making it white or kind of a darker like gray of some kind. So basically that's diffuse is black, specular is gold. The gloss map is your fine surface detail. So it's what's called a micro surface detail, and basically what it is it's like polishing. If you polish part of a chrome bumper and the rest was really really rough, that would be included in the gloss map. It's basically your micro surface finish where you have polish and rough sections, or oxidation, things like that. So that's all covered in the gloss layer here. And whiter is more glossy. So for like this gold texture that I will be showing you here, it's quite white. Now for something like granite, you have a very dark gloss map. So yes, gloss map. Now, normal maps, pretty much anyone watching this video is probably going to be familiar, but basically this is large scale bump. So, like if I took a hammer and hit that chrome bumper I was talking about with the gloss map, the part you hit on the chrome bumper would actually be covered in the gloss map. It's for a very, larger scale nicks and bumps and, things like that. So, for the metal workflow here, you have a typical setup. I hope you know how Blender works if you're watching this, or at least have some idea. But anyway, this is your typical material setup. So if you have all 4 textures, you want to set all these to white and the intensity to 1, basically. The hardness value doesn't matter if you're using a gloss map. and if you're not using a gloss map, I will cover that in the top one here. So, so like I said, diffuse is black for all metals. This is your specular color. This is you know, the color of the metal, as you can see here. So you have like a golden color down there. Gloss map and normal, and the way these are mapped, and this is the same across all types, the way they're mapped. So diffuse goes on your color. This is like a default Blender when you load in a texture. The specular here is set to the intensity value. It's just the way Blender, when you export out Collada, this is the DAE file, I guess, if you want to call it that. This is where the specular goes. Gloss. Now this is the unique part in Blender to Janus, because Blender doesn't have PBR, so it's actually set to the alpha influence, which is, you know, normally used for transparencies and stuff, but for Janus it actually uses this value. This will be subject to change if and when Blender actually, you know, outputs the stuff, and some of that will change. So and normal map, typical, you just assign down here the geometry influence under normal. So that's typical metal. Now, if you were to download a game-ready specular gloss PBR texture pack from, you know, just one of the texture websites, this is what you would get right here. You'd get 4, you know, maybe more textures, but generally 4 is what you would need. So there you go on that. That is a metal. Okay, now you don't have to use all 4 textures, and that's how this is set up here. So this here is basically another type, you know, just another object with a metal type look to it. And I only have a normal texture on here. You could set a gloss texture as well. You could set up, you know, any amount of the textures that you want. But generally speaking, you would probably, for most metals, only use a normal and a gloss at most. So yes, basically yes, you set your diffuse. Now this is like the texture. You set your diffuse to black. This is true for all metals. Your specular, in this case, it is that color. So just pick whatever. If you made it green, it would be green, but whatever. This hardness value is what you use if you do not use a gloss texture. So this here, 511 is equivalent to a perfect mirror, whereas 1 is a very dull, you know, highly oxidized, you know, metallic surface or something, just really, really dull surface. So I guess I can show you the difference here. So previously, this object in Janus is basically set to the mirror finish. You can see the normal map gives it some kind of bumpiness to the surface of it. And so what I'm going to do, so this was set to, this is how it was set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this down to 1, so it's really rough, and I'm going to change the color to, I don't know, purple. Alright? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this out. Now, just to cover this just a bit here, these are the export options I use. You pretty much always want to select the apply modifiers. Selection only, I generally do that because, you know, you kind of want to select objects piecemeal out. So whatever's selected in your viewport, this option here will only export that section out. And include material textures. What this does is this copies all the textures that you associate with all the objects. It actually makes a copy and inside of the folder and associates the pathing within the DAE itself, because this is DAE is an XML. Anyway, that's you don't really need to know all that stuff, but if you want to open the DAE, you can see how that kind of works. But yes, select this. When you export out, all your textures will be in the same folder as where you export the object out. I'm going to export that out, and we're going to go in here, and this will turn into a pink and very dull, kind of almost plastic looking object. As you can see, it's extremely dull to the point where you cannot even see any of the stuff on it. change that, put this up to, you know, some arbitrary value, a little higher than 1 because 1 is completely diffuse. We'll re-export and I'll show you how this looks. It's shiny, but not nearly as shiny as the first time you saw this. So that's the metallic workflow, and to show you an image of kind of how this hardness value works, and I will include this in the description. 0, this corresponds to 1. This is a 0 to 1 scale, but in Blender it goes from 1 to 511. So 1, 511, and you get, like, as it goes up towards 511, it actually gets a lot more chrome. You can get plastic somewhere around 70, etc., etc. And just to cover the stuff here, diffuse, gloss map, the alpha, specular on the intensity, the light map stuff. I'll cover this in a later video, but that would go here, and you would deselect color and, you know, select this. And the normal map here, and this is kind of the corresponding material section stuff, and then the world map, which I will cover. This is very, very important. This section here, the ambient color stuff. So yes, that's metal stuff, some export theory behind the PBR. Now onto the dielectrics. Now in this case, I actually have a granite surface kind of texture here. Basically has the appearance of granite rock or something. So the way this works is very similar to the metals. There's a couple differences. So I'm going to go to the bottom one here. This has all 4 textures. Now, as you can see, it's set up traditional, you know, white, pure white here as well. Hardness doesn't matter if you use a gloss map. So you have your diffuse. Now let me show you these textures. Diffuse, gloss, much darker than the metal because it is a, you know, much less shiny surface. Typical normal map, and a specular color. Now the difference between not really a difference, but all dielectric materials in real life actually reflect anywhere between like 1 to 10% of the light that hits them. So, you know, really shiny plastic might reflect like 10% of the light. Something very dark like chalkboard, you draw with on, you know, like in a school or something, that would be, you know, really dark, like 1%, or you know, sometimes less than that. Anyway, that's generally speaking with dielectrics, you set as one color. So you wouldn't actually put in a texture map. You would just apply the setting. But let me show you this. So we have diffuse, specular, gloss, and a normal. So diffuse, specular, gloss, and normal. So how the specular here now this here is one color obviously, and this yeah, so this is like 4% light basically. That's what this value represents. It's all one color. It could be like a 5 by 5 pixel or 1 by 1 pixel even. So yeah, that's, you know, from a game ready website, this is basically what you'll get as a rock texture. But to show a different kind of way to do this, where you don't need all the textures and you can hard code some of the values. So in this case, on the upper one, I only have diffuse and normal. Now, that's the only 2 textures I have. It's pretty self-explanatory. But the difference here is I'm actually hard coding the specular value at 1%, because, you know, granite doesn't reflect a whole lot of light, whereas this one is white, but it has a specular set. So here, yeah, hard coded. Now the hardness value is also hard coded because this does not have a gloss map. This has a pretty dark gloss map. On the bottom here, this one does not have a gloss map, so you have to hard code it right here. So I set this at 4 because granite is very, very rough. So I'll show you what that looks like in JanusVR. It looks very, very similar to the one with all 4 textures. Now this is what you would get with game ready textures, but to save on texture memory, you can hard code these values, and you just save on some stuff. It's optimization really. So that's how that's set up. Now, just to show you what would happen if you set this higher, the specular color, so it reflects more light. As you can see here, it's what 26.7% of the light hitting it, it will be reflected. We can set the hardness up so it will be a lot more shiny. Actually, let's put this down at like, I don't know, like 9% or something. Refresh the web page. Now it's a lot shinier, reflects a lot more of the light, etc., etc. So that's some difference in the dielectric, right? So diffuse is black, diffuse with a colored specular, and dielectrics is a colored diffuse with a generally dark specular color because it does not reflect a lot of light. Now the hybrid scenario, and that's what we'll get on to the next thing here. This hybrid scenario here, what this is a combination of both metallic and the specular, but it comes down to the textures that you use. So in this case, I'm using 3 textures, and I will explain why in a second. So right now, so we have, it's basically a rusty metal. This is, I'll show you in Janus real quick what this looks like. It's kind of like a rusty, irony looking whatever. So that's what that looks like in Janus. This is what it looks like in Blender. And the textures associated. So we have rust color, this is your diffuse section. And like I said with metallics, the metallics have a black diffuse texture. So this is your diffuse texture for that, rust color stuff. So, yes. So the metallic sections are going to be the black sections in this diffuse layer. Now this is a combination gloss and specular map. So as you can see, the black texture here corresponds to the white section here. And because now if you think back to the gloss maps, the whiter they are, the shinier they are. And the specular is the reflected color of the light. So when you combine the black here with the very white, glossiness here, you actually get a very reflective surface. So it's this would appear metallic, whereas the rust color is a very dark gloss value map, right? So it's very very rough. So if you combine these two setups, basically, you can actually end up with something that resembles rust on a metal surface. Now, some of the stuff you can do to play around with this is actually change the color of this rust to like a green patina or something like that. So you'd end up with like a copper, like an oxidized copper color. So you change this to green and actually put like a red filter over this entire thing, so we can just do something like, let me see here, this video is going to be really long. Sorry for your ears there. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to put a red color tint over this. Now this is just really basic. This is over the specular gloss layer. So what we're going to do here, flatten. Now this will correspond, because I'm saving out to the texture that's directly on here. It's kind of like that, and then we'll change the hue of this. Some kind of green patina here. Save this as well, and F5 this again, and you'll end up with what, like, that didn't work. What happened? sure what happened there. Saving straight to the different layer there. Alright. Sorry, that was a different folder that I saved that to. So basically you can see it's kind of resembles a coppery color. And if I actually go here and save as to specular gloss layer. Okay. There. Now you have a kind of patina copper. So that's kind of some of the experimentation you can do with these texture setups. But the thing to keep in mind for these hybrids is the black, and in combination with a very white specular gloss layer, or colored specular and gloss layer, you'll end up with something like this. Yeah, very awesome stuff. This is yeah, this is how you make 3D web pages in Blender using, you know, Blender itself, outputting straight into JanusVR, no compiling as you would do in other, you know, 3D engines and things like that. And just to really quickly iterate on this, so this here is like an SR71, obviously. I'm going to set it up as a specular, kind of like a metallic thing using a this is just a random model I found. This is normally a diffuse model that you would use here. So this here is the texture that I got out of it, and it also came with a normal map. Now this is just, you know, typical of all normal maps, but this here is a little different in how you might use it. So what you do is you set it as a metal workflow. So diffuse, set the specular, you can change the color, but, you know, yeah, experiment with that stuff. Set the hardness value. Now for an SR71, it's quite, they're not really like super shiny. It's not like a mirror finish. It's quite diffuse. So set the normal map as you normally would, but the texture that was normally specified as like a diffuse texture, just set that as an intensity. So it's set as a specular, and it will reflect the diffuse light, and then you end up something like this. And this, you can see the normal map, see the detail in the wings here. And I do just, the last thing I want to cover is the windows here. So you can use a texture as a diffuse texture, something like a texture with an alpha layer, so that it has, you know, transparency here. And you use that, but what you do in Blender is you go to the glass layer here, set the hardness to 511, because glass is very shiny, so it reflects, you know, it's like a mirror finish. And you set the specular, so glass doesn't reflect a whole lot of the light back towards you, because it's transparent. So, you know, most of it goes through the stuff, but only like, you know, a couple percent come back at you. So what you do is you set your specular down, your hardness way up. You know, this is your gloss value, all the way up to like mirror finish. Now if you were using like a frosty glass, you would set this, you know, way down, but because it's like, you know, shiny glass, you do that, and then you just set your glass texture as just a typical glass, as a diffuse texture with some alpha built in, so like a PNG of some kind. And that is actually, and this is the result. So you end up with some fairly realistic looking glass. Pretty decent model, fairly low poly as well. And yeah, so that's a real world example that you would probably use, you know, so you can have multiple materials on the same mesh. You can see the windows and the body are the same parts. And yeah, so that concludes the demonstration here. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see some awesome web pages made with this with Blender and JanusVR. Thank you for watching.